Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the remote solar system, elections were more than just a civic duty, they were the last thread that bound the people to their ideals. Democracy was the symbol of hope, the safeguard against tyranny, the promise that every citizen had a voice. Yet, as the sun rose on election day, the system teetered on the edge of an abyss. People were not voting for change, but for survival. And survival, as it turns out, can be a dangerous thing to chase when fear takes the wheel. Xander Orus, the man who promised to break free from the iron grip of the Galactic Union, stood at the heart of it all. His campaign speeches had whipped the people of Solara into a frenzy, feeding off their grievances, their growing discontent with the Union's neglect. Solara, rich with untapped resources, was a jewel in the Union's vast empire, yet it had been relegated to the outer rim, forgotten and exploited. The central government, thousands of light years away, continued to tax the system heavily, draining its wealth while giving little in return. Xander had seized on this resentment, channeling it into a forceful call for independence. They take from us while we starve. They ignore us while we cry out for aid. We are not their servants. We are Solara. His voice rang out over massive crowds, echoing in the hearts of the people. They believed him. They believed in their right to be free, to control their own destiny. And so, when election day came, they flocked to the polls, hoping for salvation in the form of Xander's aggressive leadership. As the results streamed in, it was clear that the people had spoken. Xander had won in a landslide. But victory, as intoxicating as it was, came with a steep price. The Galactic Union did not take kindly to secession. The moment Xander declared Solara's independence, the Union responded with swift and calculated force. A blockade was imposed, cutting off Solara from the rest of the galaxy. No ships could enter or leave. Trade routes were severed, supplies dwindled, and the once prosperous system began to suffocate under the Union's iron grip. Inside Solara's capital city, tensions ran high. The streets buzzed with both excitement and fear. Citizens gathered in public squares, watching holographic broadcasts of Xander's speeches. He painted the Union as a tyrannical overlord, determined to crush their newfound freedom. They fear us, Xander would say, his eyes burning with conviction. They know that we, the people of Solara, have the strength to stand on our own. We will not bend. We will not break. Maya Elric, Xander's closest advisor, watched him with growing unease. She had been by his side since the early days of his campaign, drawn in by his passion, his fire. But as the war drums grew louder, so did her doubts. Xander's rhetoric had become more aggressive, more divisive. The peaceful independence movement she had once championed was now on the brink of becoming a full-scale war. She approached him one evening after a particularly rousing speech. His office was dimly lit, the blue light of the blockade shimmering outside the window. Xander, she began carefully, we need to talk. He looked up from his desk, his sharp features illuminated by the flickering screen in front of him. Maya, if this is about the speech. It's not just the speech, she interrupted, her voice tight with concern. It's everything. The blockade, the military buildup, the constant escalation. We're playing a dangerous game here. The Union won't back down, and I'm not sure we can withstand what's coming. Xander leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. The Union is bluffing. They don't have the stomach for a war this far out. They'll try to squeeze us with their blockade, but when they see that we won't fold, they'll have no choice but to negotiate. Maya shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. You don't understand, they're not bluffing, Xander. They'll crush us if it comes to that. His jaw tightened, the fire in his eyes burning brighter. They won't crush us because we won't give them the chance. We've already begun ramping up production on our defense systems. If they come for us, we'll be ready. And how long do you think we can last, even with our defenses? The people are already suffering under the blockade. Supplies are running out. We're isolated. How long before we start tearing ourselves apart from the inside? Xander stood abruptly, his fists clenched. "We're not going to tear ourselves apart, Maya, we're going to stand united, and we're going to fight for our freedom." Maya stared at him, the man she had once believed in so deeply. Now, all she saw was a man driven by pride and desperation, willing to sacrifice everything for a victory that might never come. The first skirmish between Solara's forces and the Galactic Union came not long after. Xander, true to his word, had militarized the system, converting resource factories into weapons production facilities. Solaran ships, retrofitted for combat, clashed with the Union's blockade fleet in a fierce battle over the outer moons of the system. To the surprise of many, Solara held its own. The Union had not expected such resistance, and Xander's forces managed to push them back at least for now. But victory in battle did not bring peace. Instead, it emboldened Xander and fueled his belief that Solara could stand against the full might of the Union. The blockade tightened, and the war escalated. The Union, now fully committed to quelling the rebellion, sent reinforcements. Massive warships, bristling with firepower, arrived on the edge of Solar's space. General Cero Vasquez, a seasoned military commander, was put in charge of the Union's efforts to crush the uprising. He was a pragmatic man, not one for grand speeches or theatrics. He saw Xander for what he was, a dangerous idealist leading his people toward destruction. In the months that followed, Solara's once thriving cities became battlegrounds. The blockade, combined with relentless Union strikes, brought the system to its knees. Food and medicine grew scarce, hospitals overflowed with the wounded. Entire districts were reduced to rubble, and millions of lives were lost. Maya watched in horror as the dream of Solari's independence turned into a nightmare. Xander, now surrounded by military advisors and loyalists, had become increasingly isolated. He refused to listen to reason, doubling down on his rhetoric and lashing out at anyone who dared question him. The man who had once promised freedom and prosperity now ruled through fear and violence. One night, as the capital city lay in ruins and the distant thunder of battle echoed through the streets, Maya made a decision. She could no longer stand by and watch Xander lead Solar to its doom. She found him in the war room, surrounded by maps and hollow displays of the ongoing conflict. His eyes were red with exhaustion, but there was still a burning intensity in his gaze. "We need to stop this," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Xander didn't look up from the display. "Stop what?" "This war, this madness. We're losing, Xander. Can't you see that? The people are suffering, the cities are destroyed. And for what? What are we fighting for anymore?" He finally looked at her, his expression hard. "We're fighting for our freedom." Maya shook her head, her heart breaking. "This isn't freedom. This is destruction. You've turned into the very thing you swore to fight against. The Union isn't our enemy anymore, Xander." "You are." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Xander's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. "If you're not with me, Maya, then you're against me." She stared at him, the final thread of hope snapping. There was no reasoning with him anymore. The man she had once believed in was gone, consumed by his own hubris. "I'm sorry," she whispered before turning and walking away. As Maya left the war room, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. She knew what she had to do, but it would mean betraying the cause she had once believed in. It would mean betraying Xander. But in her heart, she knew there was no other choice. Maya moved swiftly through the desolate streets of the capital, her mind racing with what she needed to do next. The night was cold, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke from the recent bombardments. Buildings lay in ruins, twisted metal and debris scattered everywhere. The once thriving heart of Solara had been reduced to a war zone. She passed groups of soldiers huddled together, their eyes hollow from exhaustion and fear. They were no longer fighting for a cause, she realized. They were just trying to survive. As Maya reached the underground communication hub, she hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the looming government tower where Xander still plotted his next moves. She had followed him for so long, believed in him even longer. But that man, the one who had inspired hope in an entire star system, was gone. In his place was a leader consumed by power and blinded by a dream that had long since turned into a nightmare. She took a deep breath and entered the hub. The small, dimly lit room hummed with the sound of machinery. A few technicians glanced at her as she approached the central terminal, but no one asked questions. The people of Solara were used to covert actions by now, and Maya's status as one of Xander's top advisors granted her access everywhere. Her fingers flew over the controls, and within seconds, she had tapped into a secure Linea 1 that would bypass the surveillance networks that Xander had put in place. She had to be careful. If she was caught, she would be branded a traitor, and worse, the Union would never hear her plea. A voice crackled through the line. "This is General Ciro Vasquez of the Galactic Union. State your business." Maya swallowed, steeling herself for what was to come. "General Vasquez, this is Maya Ulrich. Broken Bar, I'm calling on behalf of Solara." There was a pause on the other end. She could imagine Vasquez narrowing his eyes, trying to figure out if this was some sort of trap. "Maya Ulrich, Xander's advisor, former advisor," she clarified. "I'm no longer aligned with him. I'm calling because Broken Bar because I want to negotiate an end to this war." Another silence, this one longer and heavier. When Vasquez spoke again, his voice was laced with skepticism. "You're asking for peace? After the atrocities Xander has committed?" "I'm asking for an end to the slaughter," Maya replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Xander's lost control. The people of Solara are suffering. We don't want this war anymore." "And why should I trust you?" Vasquez's tone was icy. "How do I know this isn't just another one of Xander's tricks?" Maya hesitated. There was no easy answer to that. In truth, she didn't know if Vasquez could trust her, but it was a risk she had to take. "Because I'm willing to prove it," she said finally. "I'm willing to meet you face to face, alone, unarmed. If you want this war to end, we have to start somewhere." The line was silent for a few more agonizing moments before Vasquez responded. "You've got one chance, Ulrich." "One. If this is a trick, if you try anything, I won't," she interrupted. "I just want to end this." They arranged the meeting for the next day, at a neutral location just beyond the capital's outskirts. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she left the communication hub. There was no turning back now. She had taken the first step toward betraying Xander, toward saving Solar from further devastation. But she couldn't shake the fear that this might all be too little, too late. The next morning, the sky above Solara was a dull gray, thick with the smoke of burning cities. Maya made her way to the rendezvous point, a barren expanse of land that had once been home to a bustling marketplace. Now, it was nothing more than ash and rubble. The devastation of the war was everywhere, in every cracked building and every scorched piece of earth. This was what Xander had led them to. This was the price of independence. A single Union dropship descended from the sky, its sleek, black hull cutting through the thick clouds. Maya's pulse quickened as it touched down in front of her, the whir of its engines echoing in the emptiness. The door opened, and a group of Union soldiers stepped out, their weapons held at the ready. Behind them, General Vasquez emerged, his stern face as unreadable as ever. He approached her slowly, sizing her up. "Ulrich," he said by way of greeting, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "You've got guts coming here alone." "I don't have any other choice," Maya replied, standing her ground. "Solar doesn't have any other choice." Vasquez studied her for a moment longer before nodding to his men, who lowered their weapons but stayed close. "You say Xander's lost control. What exactly are you offering?" Maya took a deep breath. "I'm offering the surrender of Solara. I'll help you take down Xander. In exchange, I want guarantees for the safety of Solara's civilians. No more bombings, no more blockades. We need Aida food, medicine, infrastructure. The people don't deserve to suffer any more than they already have." Vasquez's eyes narrowed. "And how do you plan to bring down Xander?" "I know his security protocols. I can get you inside the capital, into the government tower. You'll have a clear shot at taking him into custody. The general crossed his arms, considering her offer. And what's in it for you, Ulrich? Why betray the man you once stood beside? Maya's voice softened. Because I see what he's become. This isn't what we wanted. This isn't the future Solara deserves. I just want to stop the bloodshed. Vasquez studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, we'll do it your way. But if you betray me, if this turns out to be a trap, it won't, Maya said firmly. This ends today. The plan was set in motion quickly. Maya returned to the capital, her heart racing with the knowledge that everything hinged on the next few hours. She had given Vasquez the codes to Xander's personal security detail, allowing the Union forces to infiltrate the tower without detection. Once inside, they would take Xander into custody and end the war. It all seemed so simple in theory, but Maya knew that the reality would be far more dangerous. Xander wasn't the type to go down without a fight. As she entered the tower, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The quarters were eerily quiet, the once bustling government headquarters now a hollow shell of its former self. Most of Xander's staff had either fled or been conscripted into the war effort. Only a few loyalists remained, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. Maya made her way to Xander's private quarters, where she knew he would be holed up, plotting his next move. Her hand shook as she reached for the door, but she forced herself to stay calm. This had to be done. She stepped inside, and there he was, standing by the window, staring out at the ruined city below. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark with exhaustion. He turned when he heard her enter, a faint smile playing on his lips. Maya, he said softly, I didn't expect to see you. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay composed. Xander, we need to talk. He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Talk about what? The war? The destruction? We've been through this before, Maya. No, she said, her voice steady. We haven't. Not like this. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Xander's gaze shifted to the window again, his expression unreadable. You think I've failed, he said quietly. Maya hesitated. I think you've lost sight of what we were fighting for. Xander laughed, a bitter sound. You don't get it, do you? This was never about me. It was never about power or control. This was about Solara, about our people's right to be free, and look at what that's cost us, Maya said, her voice rising with emotion. The people are starving. The cities are in ruins. Billions have died. Was this freedom worth all of that? Xander's eyes blazed with fury as he turned to face her fully. You're wrong, Maya. You've always been wrong. Sacrifices have to be made for freedom. You knew that when you joined me. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Not like this. The door behind her burst open, and Union soldiers flooded the room, their weapons trained on Xander. For a split second, he looked at Maya with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Then, his face hardened. He reached for the weapon at his side, but before he could draw it, the soldiers fired. Xander fell to the ground, his body convulsing for a moment before going still. Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. It was over. The war, the rebellion, everything a broken bar. It was finally over. General Vasquez entered the room, his face grim. He glanced down at Xander's body before turning to Maya. It's done. She nodded, feeling numb. She had wanted to end the war, but she hadn't expected it to end like this. What happens now? Vasquez sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Now we clean up the mess. Maya stared out the window, at the ruined city below. The people of Solara would have to rebuild, to pick up the pieces of what was left of their world. And she would be there to help them, even if she wasn't sure how to move forward herself. The last election in Solara's history had come and gone, leaving only ashes in its wake. The dream of freedom had turned into a nightmare, and the cost had been far too high. As the Union forces began the process of restoring order, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that democracy had died alongside Xander. The elections, once a symbol of hope, had become a distant memory, a relic of a time when the people still believed in the power of their own voices. Now, all that remained was silence,